Derry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Neil. Looking forward to it.
I know you've had a bit of a trek down here thanks to the British Rail Network, so I do appreciate you making the effort. I think a good place to start and where we usually do is just a bit about you, where you've come from, where you're at, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Derry. I'm the CEO and co-founder of OneUP Sales. We are a sales performance management platform helping recruitment companies to both understand and drive sales performance. Been doing it now for about 8 years. Prior to that, I used to work in the games industry, working on, I always tell this joke, working on the game. It's not really a very good joke, to be honest. Working on the Angry Birds series, which was a thing until Fortnite came along and started draining parents' wallets the world over. Normally, if I do a talk, I'll always ask people to raise their hands. Who knows about video games? Yeah. Who's got kids to play it? Yeah. Who recognises Fortnite? And they just go, oh, the groan as all the money they've lost on that game. Yeah. That was my background and really kind of came about combining sales performance, given most salespeople are very motivationally driven, very data heavy in what they produce in their day to day. Combining that with the motivational parts of video games has kind of got us to where we are today, alongside reporting and all the other wonderful things that come into that. Been one hell of a journey so far, many ups and downs, many I'm sure which I'm more than happy to go into at any point. But yeah, really can't complain. Love it. Every single day brings a new challenge, including trains today, apparently.
And chicken tikka sandwiches, which you thought were peri-peri chicken, or vice versa.
The label on the shelf said chicken tikka, and I thought, I really fancied that today. It turned out to be peri-peri, and I was like, well, this has ruined my day because I'm not a spice person. No. But here we stand.
But you're here.
I'm alive. That's the important part. I survived a sandwich.
Great. So let's start with where did OneUp come from? Where did the idea sprout from, and how did you approach that?
Well, fun bit of lore about the company is it's not called as an official name OneUp Sales. It's called Stormburst Studios Limited. And Stormburst Studios Limited was mine and my co-founder's original game studio where we were working on a couple of mobile games. And back then we were part of an accelerator program who said to us, look, if you want to build video games, you're probably best off being in a creative studio somewhere, not on a business accelerator. And we were like, okay, then, well, fair point. Let's twist it and try something else because very few games actually make money. Probably won't surprise you too much. There are a lot of crap games out there that never really get the promo they need to go and make a lot of money, or good ones in even worse cases where they don't get any at all. And so we said about building software, which I'm pretty sure has an even lower success rate. But we thought, yeah, why not? Let's go and give it a whirl. My co-founder had worked for 18 months in door-to-door sales. So he'd seen this kind of whiteboard in the office at the end of the day during team meetings, the motivational side of sales, the amount of data they're producing and recording. And we just knew from working on video games where you're inundated with things that try and keep you engaged, whether it's achievements that you unlock, whether it's celebratory things inside the game itself. And we just thought, there's probably a world here where you can combine the two together. Mm-hmm. And the next day we were like, yeah, it's a great idea. Grabbed a bottle of Bournemouth cider each, yeah, we'll make millions, great idea. And then got into our office space the next day and Googled it and found out literally a week prior, Microsoft had acquired a company called, is it Fantasy Sales Team or something, which is kind of like fantasy football, but for sales teams. And we were like, oh no, someone else has done it in our naivety. And our mentor was like, that's a good sign. If Microsoft are acquiring companies in this space, you're in the right sort of area. Yeah. And so things just kind of steam ahead from there, being all about the motivational side. Then I think, as we all know, customers start saying, can I have this? Can I have that? And before you know it becomes a little bit more than just running sales competitions. It's TV displays, it's reports, it's dashboards, it's more integrations than I care to count at this point as well. And things have just really built out from there.
Great. And what was the switch like from kind of the business to consumer to the business to business approach? Did you see that switch from the gaming then through to the performance and the gaming side?
Not massively, admittedly, because we found that when I was in the games industry, I was only a dev back then, mind you, but back then it was very much working in the industry, working on the Angry Birds series. Our client was Rovio, who published the game, right? So we kind of had a B2B relationship there. So I would demo to, for example, people that came to visit from Finland to Oxford to come and see our office, to come and see the game, for example. It was very B2B. When we started building out our first couple of titles, and we did sell one to someone, that was a B2C thing, but it was more someone who had taken in a bunch of money, wanted to build his own game to see what he could do, for example. So it wasn't exactly a long project. Sure. It took us about 3 months to get it done. It was a bit of money in the back pocket, and then we just set in full force on building OneUp as it is today.
Okay. So where did it? So you started that off. Talk about the beginning of that whole experience of starting to getting away from, I guess, what you knew, and then starting the business to compete against Microsoft.
Yeah, good Lord, right? Good Lord. If you tell someone your number one competitor is Microsoft, most investors will turn around and be like, no, not getting involved in that one. They've got more money, more people, more everything. Now, I always look back, and whenever people ask me, would you do it all the same again if you had your time? I think the one thing I always say is I would have gone and worked in a company for 2 or 3 years first to really learn business to a deeper level. Because I knew nothing about sales, nothing about recruitment, nothing really about building a company full stop. And so the number of mistakes that we made in those early days were horrific. Like we raised 150 grand in January 2017, hired all the wrong people, put all the focus in the wrong areas, hired a lot of, friends or family friends or people that we knew rather than going out into the industry cold and finding people that were really good. Problem being, we didn't know what we really needed back in those days. So that 150 got piddled away. I think we won 2 clients during that time. And they were ones that I've been engaging before raising the money. So everything that could have gone wrong in 2017 just did. And start of 2018, it was back to me and my co-founder making about 2 grand a month in revenue. And because we had no idea about how to set up an Amazon Web Service like setup, we were spending 1,500 quid a month on server fees, and 500 quid that was left over was going to my co-founder to pay for his mortgage. So we had nothing. And it was a real reset and very kind of hard year and a half of learning all these things that you can get wrong, whether it comes to hiring, to selling, to building products. It was just a very good and very expensive exercise in learning, I think.
So what made you keep going?
A little bit around being stubborn, frankly. I think I'm a very, very stubborn person, quite ambitious. And so I was like, well, we've raised a bunch of money. We've got a few customers on board. Clearly there is something here.
Yeah.
What can we do to keep on building this for? What have we got to try and do next? And really interestingly, I moonlight as a video games commentator, so travel around the world talking about video game tournaments. Absolutely love it. During 2018, I was actually living in Kiev out in Ukraine, working on a game out there because they had a studio in the middle of Kiev. I'm working on a game called Overwatch. But during that time, we set up a couple of partnerships that won us about 30 new customers. So I would go from waking up in the morning, doing a bunch of onboarding calls with customers, doing all the technical setup, for example, getting agreements signed, all that kind of stuff, to then talking about video games for 6 hours in the evening to actually make some money to live on. Out in Kiev, it's not very expensive to live, admittedly. And then just rinse and repeat the same thing for about 3 months. And before you know it, I think we'd grown our monthly revenue to about 10 grand or so, hired in a sales leader, for example, while still doing this sort of dual life just to keep myself afloat in terms of money. And yeah, that was a pretty wild year, all things considered.
And did you find that it actually played in your favor of not, like you said, you didn't know how to sell? I've worked with a few people who aren't from a sales background, but they're technical, they're passionate about what they've got to sell, and that actually puts the audience at real ease because they don't even feel, and they're probably not being sold to, and that passion comes across.
Yeah.
So did that play in your favor?
I think it did. The one thing I always feel I've invested in a bunch of companies since then as an angel investor. I think I've got 12 companies now, and the one thing I always say to them is, this is now the easiest time of your life to sell because you're selling with the founder badge. And if it says founder in your job title anywhere, they're like, oh, cool, I'm talking to the founder. I can make a feature request and I know that he's the one who ultimately is going to say yes or no to it. And it does carry a certain amount of prestige with it. And one of the riskiest hires you make, at least I find across these companies that I've spoken to, is that first sales hire. Because they're trying to take all the knowledge that you've got about the product, about the problem space that you're solving in, around the way that you speak about it. They've got to take all that, replicate it, and do so with less prestige than you do because you've got that founder badge. Yeah. And so it was really easy in those early days, especially for those that were I think those that were slightly more technically minded themselves really liked the conversation because it was much more about the product than it was, like you say, a classic sales conversation where it was all about value and let's get contracts out and negotiate. It was much more about what we can do with the products and the features we can build. That definitely matured over time. I'm glad to say I'm a much better salesperson now than I was back then, but it got the job done, right?
Mm-hmm. So then so you're wearing different hats with your co-founder. Where did you literally just learn the job, how to do things, make mistakes, make sure you didn't do them again?
Yep, literally that.
Right.
Again, whether it was from hiring, whether it was firing, whether it was from marketing, sales, finance, all kinds of stuff. Obviously, you find mentors along that journey. I met a couple of NEDs come and join our board, for example, who have really helped me learn a lot more about certain areas.
Yeah.
But a lot of it, honestly, has been from cold, no network, no business experience to building a company. I feel like I could have saved maybe 4 or 5 years if I'd spent 2 or 3 years working in industry first. But equally, the journey's been very fun and I wouldn't change it.
And then how's the story developed from there? We had a previous guest on and they do... she was a recruiter and she's now doing recruitment tech. And she said that the challenge that she's got is actually building the story so that it resonates with the potential audience. Did you ever struggle with that? Or did your audience kind of just get it?
Story in terms of
what you do and the value you bring and why they need to use your software, why they should work with you.
I think we got that. The reason, people always say, why did you sell to recruitment then? Because you were a sales gamification platform. Why recruitment? That's like, people in recruitment don't like saying they're salespeople, although being honest, you are salespeople. I turn around and always just say, like, I think I'm not the only person that's fell into recruitment. It seems everyone in the industry fell into recruitment, right? And ours was very much the same. We were doing a demo before we'd even written a line of code at our accountants' like startup awards dinners. I think the winner got like 20 grand or something, 10 grand in cash, and then a bunch of support essentially. We didn't win, which I'm still gutted about. However, at that night when we demoed what we were doing, there was a recruitment company in attendance. And literally the next day on Twitter, I was on there, DM their account saying, hey, we'd love to speak to someone about what we demoed last night. You know, I realized you guys were there. Can I speak to someone? And I happened to land in the intern's inbox, who literally right next to him had their operations director sat next to him. And so we had a conversation there, and I really came to understand, you know, what problems have you guys got around data visibility, around wanting TVs in your office to really drive people to do more activity? Ironic, really, because that's the most important thing for a lot of companies these days, is how do I get my team doing more, right? And that just really kind of built out from there. So by speaking to them and then other companies I'd reach out to, whether it was cold on LinkedIn before the days of spam was a thing. I look back now and just think how easy it was to have a conversation on LinkedIn like 7 years ago versus today. It's crazy. But just speaking to those people and understanding, okay, you're a 100-person business. What are your problems around reporting, around motivation, all these kind of things? And that's just really helped us shape things out to where they are today. And so the story's kind of always grown and matured on that journey, I guess. It was definitely one that I learned, but it's one of those classic things, if you've got 2 ears, 1 mouth, just listen to what they're telling you. What are they saying their frustrations are? And even today, every time our team book in a demo, they always put down notes about why the person has taken the demo. They'll say, here's the pains they've got, the reason why they said yes. And I'll read the notes of every single one just to know, okay, what is it people are talking about? What is it that's pricking up their attention a little bit and getting them listening? And so the story is always evolving. It's always being reinforced, right? Never stop listening on that side.
And how much does the story then inform what the technology does now and what it'll do in the future?
Massively so.
Yeah.
Like we hired a new VP product 2.5 months ago now, bless him. And this whole thing has been coming to me because they know that I've got the most knowledge of most in the business about the recruitment space, around the problems they've got because of all the people that I speak to, like being here doing this kind of thing, right? But he's equally getting out there and speaking to tons of customers. I think he had like 19 calls with customers last week, which is balmy. I don't know how the hell he's done it, but he's gone out there and just spoke to as many as he can, said, right, here's what we're working on. Here's what we're thinking about. In your world, what are you worried about right now? You know, what do you need us to be able to do for you to find maximum value in that? And so there's always that question of just speaking and listening to what others are saying and taking what they're telling you as, not quite as law, because what one person says might not be enough. If 10 people are saying it, very different story, right? It tends to become a trend at that point.
Okay. So you started off with the company in 2018?
We founded it formally in November 2014. Didn't start on it properly until August 2015, but I don't ever really see us properly having gotten going until 2018, really, when things started to build up, despite raising money before that and it being a car crash experiment.
Okay. And you've mentioned a few things of I guess, the downs of starting your own business, particularly at the beginning, burning through that 150 grand, making the wrong hires, a few wrong decisions. As you know, this industry, recruitment industry, loads of people go off and do their own thing, start their own company. What would you, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that you've learned doing that perhaps people sitting here now actually in the throes of starting off their own company or thinking about it, what would you, without having perhaps those 2 or 3 years of experience, what do you think the top of the list is for those people who are thinking, I'm going to go alone?
Ooh, that's a hard one, isn't it? Because I remember when I first got started with the business, there was so much like one-line piece of advice that you get, like don't hire your friends or do this and don't do that. And it's kind of like, well, without the context, you don't know that the rule strictly applies to you. You need that additional context. And I forget every single thing that I wrote down, but back in October, I did a talk at an event called SAAS Stock, which is a big software conference over in Dublin. And the talk was titled How Not to Build a Startup, How Not to Build Your Own Company, the mistakes that you make along the journey around hiring friends, like I said, around taking on the advice of far too many people. There's so many things that you can take from it. The one thing that I'd really look back on is probably around hiring is the thing that probably has the strongest impact. And people always say it like, you know, the team that you build is what's going to make a difference. Investors will back an A team with a B product rather than a B team with an A product because they'll always back the stronger team. I think when it comes to hiring, it's just being really, really, really ruthless with what you set as the bar of what you'll accept. I think some of the mistakes we made in the early days were things like, oh, we really like this person, we have good conversation. I could see myself working with them. They seem smart and switched on. That's me liking someone, right? But that's an important part of it. Culture, I think, is a really important part of hiring someone. But professional competence needs to be assessed quite coldly, I think, is can this person do the job to a high standard? And the thing that I look for now when we tend to hire, or at least with the last 3 senior hires that I've made in terms of our VP sales, our head of marketing, and our VP products is, do they know shit tons more than me? Pardon my French. Yeah. Do they know shit tons more than me when it comes to doing their jobs? And if so, great, that's a person that can come in and teach me something. But then equally, one other thing I often tend to go and do is do like backdoor references, I call them, is I won't ask them and say, who are your references? Because the problem with that is you're always going to get someone that likes them. They're never going to put you in touch with someone who's going to say a bad word about them, right? And so I always tended to go around and say, right, who do they work with at their last company? Who were their bosses? Who worked in the same team as them? I'm going to reach out on LinkedIn and just say, hey, I'm interviewing this person for a role. Do you mind if I grab 5 minutes of your time next week to just talk about it? And they're like, yeah. Some can be a little bit like, what's it? Well, like, why? Like, why hasn't he come to me about it? And I'm like, look, being honest, I just want your honest take on him without him, putting me in touch with certain people. Do you mind? If you don't want to do it, no problem, but we'll leave it there. But often you get real honest conversations as a result of that. I think I've only had one case where someone has then gone and told the candidate, hey, just so you know, they've reached out about this. And he's then come to me and gone, why are you doing that? Because I've been like, well, obviously I want to find out if you're as legit as you say you are. That's all it comes down to. Now, we didn't hire that person in the end anyway, so that worked out okay regardless. But with others, I've always just got such valuable insights that really help determine should we hire this person or not. So that's the one thing I'd say is go out there and just, it's very easy in the early days to get caught up and feel like, oh my God, I get to share the load a little bit. Like it's not all going to be on me. Just, especially if you've been a recruiter before, you know this as well, right? Just really go out there and make sure that person is the person that you need in that seat by doing those background references and checking out what's going on.
Yeah. So it's find the right people because you've been burned by it in the past.
People that aren't the right people just slow things down astronomically. And anyone I think who's worked in a professional job will know this. If you don't know it, then maybe it's you. Who knows? But people who maybe aren't like super good with deadlines or around communication or around just being organized in general or with working with other people, those are all things that you have to get involved in, and it slows you down as a leader. Yeah. And so every single time you have to step in and do something like correct a mistake or settle a dispute or train someone in a certain area where it feels like it's real basic competence, that's all thing that slows the engine down and will slowly ground you to a halt as a business, right? It's why Netflix do a really big job of talking about the high performance culture they build. They've got a whole deck on it you can see online. Their whole thing is if you're not at the level for 2 or 3 months, we will sadly have to move you on essentially because we only want the best in the business. We keep things very low in terms of the number of processes we've got and documentation and things like that so we can move fast. But that requires having highly competent people. So I definitely recommend going to read their whole culture code. It's really interesting.
Then how important has it been for you to be creating that culture so that it's right for the people that you want to work for and the clients that you want to attract?
I think with us, when it comes down to build, I could talk about culture for days. We always try and build a really enticing culture because we're a remote, like you guys, we're a remote company. Yeah. But we, every 6 weeks at least, get together.
Yeah, you get together, don't you? Yeah.
Either have the functions get together in what we call minor meetups, but then major meetups once a quarter is the whole company coming together for 2 days in. Our last one was in Leicester, and everyone hears Leicester. That's horrible. I'm like, yeah, I know. I went to uni there. I know what it's like. But we just choose random cities and just go there because people get to experience different parts of the UK they otherwise wouldn't get to see. We had a really good time in Leicester, to be fair. All things people tend to assume about Leicester. And that's just really good, I think, for almost breaking down the sort of monotony of remote work because as much as people love the flexibility it brings, we have people internally who say, look, do you mind if 1 or 2 days a week I go and work in a WeWork or go and find a remote desk somewhere because I'm going crazy sat at home? And part of me wants to turn around and be like, why did you take a remote job? You should know this by now. But equally, we want to support people who do want to be like that. They say, I do want to work remote. I love the company and we think they're good. They're great at the job. Why not hire them? But it's also then having the ability to support them in what they need. And so when people look at us as a company and see, right, you're fully remote, you do an all expense meetup every 3 months, for example, we get together as a team every 6 to make sure there's that FaceTime there to sort of break the monotony of remote work. We give benefits around 1,000,001 things, I could go on forever about that as well. This is a great place to work. I want to work there. That's when we can then ask for something back from the other side and say, right, well, we're only taking those that we know are going to be shit hot at their job, right? And so it kind of comes both ways where we give a lot to the other side. We kind of also ask for a lot back in that sense. And it has to come from both directions, I think, to really work. And that's one thing I think that we've got pretty right over the years.
You're saying there that you obviously went through the challenges of income of $2,000, big portion goes to paying for the servers.
Should not have been paying that much money for service, I'll tell you that much, Jesus.
And then the slice of cake going to pay your co-founder's mortgage. Was there a point where you thought, right, we're now on to something good here? We're now, the idea that we had, the story that we have crafted, it's now hitting home and we've got a real viable business that we're...
I think it was probably later that year, to be fair. I think when we were at 2K monthly recurring revenue, I think that was like 4 customers. Mm-hmm. And it was when we got a couple of partnerships in Q2 that then led to us getting to about 30, 35 customers by, I think it was like the end of Q3. Right. And at that point, monthly recurring revenue was like 10 grand, for example.
That's amazing.
Yeah. That was a big step up at that point. And I think at that point, it was like, now there's clearly something here, right? If you get into 10 grand a month in monthly recurring revenue, then fantastic. 120 grand a year doesn't sound like a ton, but it suggests there's something there that you can build on and grow from. And it was at that point where we chose to hire in a sales leader, our first one to come in and take it off me. And then over those next, 18 months, probably up to the start of COVID, I think March 2020, we grew the business then to 35K in monthly recurring revenue. So it showed then it wasn't just me that could sell it, others could come in and sell it as well, which was a great sign of repeatability. And so the first kind of realization it was something was that point where we got it to about 10, I think. Okay. And then the fact we could then repeat it up to 35 showed, hey, there's actual real legs here. Like others can come in and sell this, we can grow it into a business. And so almost we went.
And then when did you then take the decision to say, okay, well, we now really want to grow? And then how do you do that?
Yeah, that was a fun one.
You said you ran into COVID, into lockdown, threw a lot of businesses up in the air.
Definitely.
Was that tough?
It was an interesting couple of quarters, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
So it all kicked off in like late March and like all deals that were like ongoing froze. No one wanted to speak about software anymore. Yeah. We were just like, oh, crap. So we kind of battened down the hatches. Like I think at that point our team was 8 people. Mm-hmm. And I think we furloughed everyone except me, my co-founder, and Emma, who's our head of CS, because she would just be able to do support. She could do training, implementation. She could do it all essentially. So it made sense to have us 3 in the business. And now then sales leader had been with us and got us to 35, then moved on. So it was just us then doing it all again, which wasn't the end of the world given costs at that time sucked, right? And Q3 came around, and I think the Q3 of 2020 turned to be our best quarter ever. Like the market just kind of really bounced back with aggression, right? And that was the build into the very high 2021, 2022 that I think we all saw in the recruitment space and really across much of the world with tech hiring and all the rest of it. And so with that sort of propelling everything forward, that became okay again at that point, I thought. And the thing is, just before COVID had come in, we were talking about raising another round of funding of about 600 grand in May 2020. That got delayed by a year and we raised it instead, I think, in May 21. And revenue, I think 35, it was like entering a wormhole to go from March 2020 to March 21. Revenue was the same going into March 20 as it was coming out of March 21, like 35K, just kind of stayed pretty much flat. We saw a bit of dip during that year. It wasn't the end of the world, but we managed to recover pretty well. And then obviously during the boom times, rode that wave pretty aggressively up until where it is now.
Yeah. And then you got the injection of cash for the investment.
And then we raised another 2.25 because I think the rationale of Mercy, who's our existing investor, is they raised 150, they pissed it up the wall. Fine, whatever. We then grew it organically without any funding or any kind of like source of funds coming in externally from 2K a month to 35. And they were like, oh, okay, let's give you 600K and see what happens next. And then I think when they invested, we got it from where it was then at 35 a month up to 1.6 to annually. I think it was about 115, 120K a month instead. And like, okay, well, you 4x'd during, or like 3x during the time we've given you this money. Let's give you more and find out what happens. And admittedly now things have slowed down a bit because of the market dip, I think, as we all know it being, like existing customers are cutting seat counts, so revenue is kind of contracting in that sense. There's a little more hesitancy out there in the general market. Still closing business, but not as much as we did during 21 and 22. And now we're looking at, again, at a further round of funding to essentially bridge us to either what could be an exit or a Series A round of funding to really go big with it.
Yeah, okay. And what does that big look like?
Big... honestly, it'll sound really boring. It's going to be more of the same because we've already started this year without raising that round of funding, expanding into Australia. We've got a little bit going on the US East Coast, for example. We're even trying non-recruitment markets here in the UK to assess, what is the appetite for this in the software world, in financial services, in whatever else it might be. And just really seeing, does what we originally intended to be a sales platform actually have appeal to sales teams, not just recruitment companies, right? And I think going bigger would look like doing all that with more resource being pushed into all of those areas. This year is very much the experimentation year to find out what does that potential future look like? What areas are going to work for us, and where should we be putting more resources in future?
Yeah.
Because there's very little point going into a funding round saying, oh, I want to raise the money and then do experiments to see what works. Investors would much rather you come to them saying, right, we've put a little bit of money into these areas and this has proven to work or that hasn't. Now we want to put 5 times as much in those areas and really make it go big.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stage I think we want to get to.
Yeah. So you had quite an exciting period of the business.
It's a lot of change this year. Yeah. Like we've just stayed in UK recruitment and said, look, that's our home. We haven't got to leave it. Like, why change? We've got to over 2 million in revenue doing that. What's the point in twisting away from that? Whereas now it's at a point where, as we say, you can sort of see the edges of the UK market. There's only so many recruiters that sort of fit the ICP, as we call it, 5 to 500 heads is what we try and sell to realistically, and ones that are using CRMs that we integrate with. So that suddenly kind of really condenses down that market to maybe 2,000, 3,000 companies in the UK. We've got 300 of them already, for example. Like, how many more can you realistically get? Because some of the market are never going to buy what you want. And the ones that we can still close are going to be harder to win. It's the low-hanging fruit's gone in a sense. And so that's why we're looking at things like Australia, like the US East Coast, like other markets in the UK, is, okay, if there's another few million revenue hanging on, again, low-hanging branches in those markets, and we can prove that it's more than just a recruitment product, the business then starts to look very exciting.
Yeah, okay. And I know that you've done some research from the data that the platform's feeding back to you. Do you want to share a bit about that?
Yeah, a thing we're really interested in at the moment is how we can aggregate all the stuff that we capture. And this, I don't want to go too technical with this. I'm a techie by trade, so always trying to avoid the talk about it too much. But obviously we capture all this data from these 300 customers of varying sizes, industries they serve. We're capturing how many candidates they source, in the jobs and requirements they're finding, the deals they're doing. And across all of that, we can analyze it all and understand, one, what does the average, recruiter look like at the moment? How hard is it to close a job versus what it was 12 months ago? How many jobs is the average recruiter finding? What's the average billing per month that we're seeing per recruiter? And so I think quite naturally, we've seen what, a lot of other companies have seen. When I think about other CRM providers, or think about Rec and their tracking they've been doing, everyone's seen that sort of downturn towards the end of last year. And the nice thing is it's kind of hit an air quotes, I won't say rock bottom, but it's hit a pretty stable point where things can now start to recover again. And we're always talking to customers again. I'm always listening to what they're saying and what their needs are. More often than not, what we're hearing is, there's green shoots, right? There are signs things are coming back, even if they aren't strictly yet fully back. And so there's always that conversation around, okay, what does the data say to what people are saying? Does that then match up? If not, why not? And we're always trying to do analysis across that data set to know what's actually happening in the industry. And we pulled that out into a State of Recruitment 2023 report recently, where we put together all our findings on, okay, what was the trend over the last 12 months for jobs being added per agency? What about the CVs being sent, the interviews being arranged, the placements they've done? How many phone calls is the average recruiter making per day? Things like that. And that really helps us go out to our customer base and say, hey, we've benchmarked across all of you, and here's what we found out, in case you want to see where you stack up against everyone else and where maybe you aren't so strong. And there's always cases of people saying, well, placements in our industry are generally of a higher value because we're hiring more senior roles, like exec search, for example. They're okay with being below the average. What we're looking to do in future is also be able to then benchmark based on the sector they're in. So all IT recruiters, for example, will be able to see how they benchmark against all IT recruiters and things like that. So it's just a really interesting point to be able to have access to all this data, be able to analyze it, and then bring those insights out, because it does give a much more realistic view of the market than one person saying, well, here's our experience, the market's coming back.
Yeah.
Anecdotal evidence isn't really enough evidence.
It doesn't always hold water, does it? So you've gathered those findings. You're then are you pushing that back into the software so people can, like you say, they can see where the best practice should be, the volume, the metrics.
That's the longer term goal
hitting
to guide you. Yeah, like the dreams that I've always had is we'd be able to have any recruiter or any sales team come along, plug in their data, and through doing that, be able to be given a benchmark of, well, here's how you now stack up against other companies like you. Maybe they've got a sales team of between X and Y, or they're doing this much in revenue, or they're serving this industry and they're in that sector, or whatever it might be. That's the longer term goal, but not yet.
I mean, that data itself must have so much useful insight for recruitment companies to fall back on and understand where they're falling short.
Totally. During COVID, I was doing this a lot, where I was getting the number literally out of our database, just crunching it all manually, and once a month sending out a report to all of our customers. I remember our first ever customer that signed up with us, a 9-person outfit in Birmingham, bless them. he started messaging me like 3 days before I put out a report. Normally it'd always be on like the 1st of the month. I'd try and get this out to people. He'd be messaging me on the 27th, 28th, like, oh, is that report ready yet? Can I get early access? Like, I'm literally taking it to my board to go and show them what's going on. And so having that data is really valuable because it helps you again understand, we are seeing this small part of the world. Like, what's the wider world seeing? What does the actual market look like right now? And that's why having those large level insights is just a really valuable thing for so many people.
So what are you seeing from the data? Are you seeing that people are hunkering down somewhat? They're taking longer to make decisions, a bit more, less likely to take risks?
Yeah, I think still in the market, it really depends on sector. I think some things like IT at the minute are still struggling a little bit because tech companies especially, I think, are still sort of in it's all about profitability. Like, we're kind of the same, right? So can't really say much more than that, pot kettle black. It is about trying to become profitable, so they're not going nuts on hiring right now. So those still serve in the IT sector. Where there's pocket companies or pocket skill sets that are really valuable, they're doing okay. Ones that are more generalist IT, I think still struggling quite a bit to really find the right people. Though there's always the more like aggressively minded IT companies or software companies that are now saying the market's going to come back in 6 to 12 months. We want to be ahead of the curve now, so we want to hire devs in to be able to make this work. So there's an example there. I remember during COVID is a great example. Medical device companies were doing incredibly well. So anyone recruiting into medical device companies were absolutely loving life and doing really, really well. Whereas maybe those doing it to healthcare, interestingly, weren't flying as much as I thought they would. I thought they'd do really well during COVID, but apparently not. So just following these trends all the time is really quite fascinating. And it's hard to turn around and say, definitively IT looks like this and finance looks like this and healthcare looks like that, because we've got a general data set across all recruitment companies right now, but we do want to break it down more into specifically what are certain sectors and industries seeing in this.
And do you think the scope from you becoming not just a tech company, but a data company as well, based on everything that you're gathering?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, this is the beautiful thing is everyone's got data, and we preach about this a lot in our sales process. Everyone's got the data, just not many are using it the way that they should be, right? Yeah. So if we can help do a lot of the heavy lifting for people, crunching those numbers together, because we're an aggregator of data, we can put that out to people. And ultimately, it's a large part of our kind of like sales methodology. If we can go out there and offer you insights on data, it builds that reputation of you being a data company that realistically know what you're talking about. And it's like, okay, well, if you guys know what you're talking about, your product must be pretty good in that sense as well. It's a sales and marketing tool at the same time, right? So it all kind of feeds itself. It's a flywheel at the end of the day.
Yeah, okay. For those people listening, for what your software, what your platform does, what's the typical customer look like, and why are they choosing to partner with you as opposed to not using a platform of a similar nature?
I think one of the hangovers we have as a product, probably from the early days, is it does a few different things. So you get different kinds of people coming in for different reasons. We started out as a gamification tool, put it up on TVs, then started branching into reporting analytics. So you get people across that spectrum that come to you, right? So some people will come to us purely because it's a motivational play. They want to have TVs up in their office to make the office environment a fun place to be. They want it to sing and dance when someone closes a deal instead of having a gong, for example. Some are sick and tired of using things like spreadsheets and whiteboards to run competitions on. Every time someone makes a deal, you go and write one on there. Mm-hmm. Was that one that was there before? Was that for this one, or was it from the one from last week? I can't remember which one it was.
I've done that. Been there, done that.
You can buy our software. There you go. So going to be things like that as well. And I think for some of them, it's more, we're hiring quite a young workforce. They want it to be a bit more tech-enabled than maybe the old school way of sales where it was whiteboards and spreadsheets, things like that. And then I think, especially when you start getting into slightly larger companies, it does become much more about data visibility. And I think in the market that we're in right now, where everyone is really worried about, are we efficient as a business? Are we doing all the right things? That mean we won't run into a brick wall in 3 months' time where we're out of money and have to start letting people go. And given, especially when things have been slightly more hybrid since COVID, everyone wants to know what is actually going on in the business. Can I track the performance of my team and know who's doing what? And then to a deeper level, when you get to being a larger company, it's much more about asking questions of that data. So a good bit of work we're doing right now in our product, for example, is really deep yet flexible reporting. So you'll be able to ask questions like, of all the jobs that we've got open right now, which ones have we not sent more than 3 CVs to inside their first 7 days of being on our system? Or of all the customers we've got, how many calls have we made out to them, how many meetings have we had, and how much revenue have we got from them, / placements, whatever you want to look at, to really help them understand who should we be trying to do more business with and who should we be peeling back on. So really trying to go deeper into the data than just who has done what amount of activity. It's a whole new layer to it that goes beyond that. So you get those that are very much data savants who want to really dig in and understand stuff. You get those who just want to use that data to motivate people. It all comes back to that same commonality of we want to be using our data better, though. That's the idea.
And on the motivation piece, how are there any trends with what recruitment companies are leaning on with your platform to motivate their staff? Like you say, it's like it's going to be more appealing for some generations than others.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's an assumption. Is that actually the fact?
It really varies, like company to company. So we have two types of competitions that you can run today. One called leagues and one called missions. Leagues are you put in a league, you earn points for your activity, you stack up against each other, or you have teams in it where teams stack up against teams. Missions is when the whole company is working together or groups of people are working together towards an objective. So one is like internally competitive, one is kind of you against the system or whatever it is that the directors at a company set up as the goals that you've got to try and get through. And some are very much about driving that, healthy competition internally through these leagues, and that's a big part of it. Then you get those that are a little bit more, we don't want our people being against each other and kind of like fighting for things. We want them to be working together. And so you'll get things like holiday incentives being ran as a mission, which might span for a whole year and say, right, if we get to this revenue milestone, we're going away together. If we get to this second milestone, we'll have a hotel upgrade. If we get to this milestone, everyone flies first class or something like that. Whereas leagues tend to be much more short bursts. It might be a day long. It could even be a morning for like a call blitz, for example, or it would be a week long thing. It really depends on the use case and what the company's culture is like as to what they want to drive. We've tended to see where there's more senior consultants or a slightly more mature workforce, they lean more in towards missions and it's about the team is trying to achieve together. In the younger ones, it tends to be it's more about the competition against each other and stoking that little bit of fun. I think because they expect there's going to be a few beers exchanged on a Friday based on who wins and things like that. So it does really vary company to company, but it tends to gravitate around the maturity of the workforce they employ.
And is it mainly just the front office that you're appealing to? I've worked for some companies before, and usually like the mid and back office, they really get behind particularly that mission goal of what they want to achieve, and they can get really on board and they see themselves and they are a real pillar in helping the business deliver what needs to be delivered. So do you see companies bringing the middle and the back office into achieving those goals?
When it comes down to the missions, absolutely.
You do, yeah.
Because there's a saying we hear a lot in software, which is revenue is a team sport. Like everyone in the business is working towards making sure revenue can grow and all the rest of it, right? And it's no different in an agency, whether you're working in finance, whether you're a recruiter, whether you're on the marketing team, you're all trying to do something. Finance is trying to make sure invoices are paid on time so the business can keep on growing. Marketing's trying to attract candidates that you can then place into give to the delivery function to go and place them. Your business hunters are trying to find new jobs to work. Everyone has all got that same goal in mind. And I think things like our missions really help remind everyone that it is about that. It's not about, people might say, well, it is about me and my commission. That's what it's about to them. But ultimately, you're all here in the business or in the team, all trying to have a shared objective where you're all working towards the same outcome. And realistically, your opponent is out there in the market, not here inside the same company.
Yeah.
So it does help reinforce that message across the entire company of we're all working towards this together.
Yeah, but it does. And are you working across like the people who are leading? Again, I'm thinking about my experience of when I've worked at some big software companies. A lot of people get behind that whole, it's internal comms, it's also sales, it's also operations. Are you seeing that everybody jumps in and uses the platform collectively, not just to motivate, but also to have a say in how it's going to be achieved?
I think the blessing we have, and I've always called it a silver bullet, is not everyone needs to have like a login to OneUp.
Yeah.
Like it tends to be the consultants in this case who would. A reason for that being is if it's on TVs around your office, it's not exactly hidden news like how things are going so far. If you've got a slide that comes up and shows a massive bar across the middle of how far you are towards this objective, it's quite transparent as to who's done what towards it, like how's the overall company doing, things like that. And so other doesn't necessarily mean they have to log in and jump in and start using the platform to get that value. Just by having that stuff visible in the office as they go in, for example, can be a really powerful thing too.
I bet. AI.
Fun one, that, isn't it?
It is. What's, I guess, very high level, what's your experience of what the market is thinking AI-wise?
I think in general software, like B2B software especially, there is a lot of digging around that at the minute. When it comes to things like support chats, is how can we automate as much of that as possible, for example, or how can we bake it into our system to make using or creating especially a much easier process to do. I think inside recruitment so far, I've not seen tons of it. I think we're still very focused on automation in the recruitment space. A lot of CRMs are looking at their own automation products, or in some cases, think about a certain CRM acquiring an automation company at some point in the past as well. People are still very focused on that right now. I think AI will really come into its own when you see more companies in the space popping up that do AI. And there's one company I've invested in that do beautification of CVs using AI. So you aren't trusting consultants to fix typos and put things into a prettier format, which can just be an absolute nuisance at the best of times. They do all that with AI, which is fantastic. And they're doing really well at the minute. They've been around for less than a year and they're already half our size. I'm just like, God, you guys are going to go fast. They're doing very well. So I think that's the first real use case of AI I've seen in independent products. I think naturally a lot of CRM providers are starting to think about it and how they can wrap it in, especially when it comes to searching a candidate base, for example. Hey AI, can you show me all the candidates that have got this skill set, rather than having to go into a search field and type in certain drop downs or whatever. That's where I think we're going to see real good use case for it in future. Just today, it's not been a number one focus because it's still this kind of new thing that's being figured out. We don't know what regulation's going to look like around AI just yet. It's starting to come into place in some areas, but it's all a bit too new at the minute. And I think recruitment as an industry tends to be a little bit more safe when it comes to new tech. They'd rather see how things are going and then borrow from other industries when things are going well there, than so much be like groundbreaking innovators in a given space, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is standing out from the crowd just yet. I think the
Not
first
massively.
person who perhaps does, they'll then find everybody wanting to catch up with them. I think customers are looking at suppliers are looking at customers. And I think the initial release of AI functionality, from our world into CRM, I think it's functional, it's helping the process, but it's not reinventing the wheel. No. Whether AI will, I don't know. But I personally think it's going to be a gradual thing. I think a few people who put their head above are going to make some waves.
Yeah.
But I think the potential, and I also think there's a big potential in the back office for AI, because what's typically a lot of manual processes, usually single person dependency with absolutely critical tasks such as running payroll, making sure candidates are paid on time. It's left down quite often to individuals, and if it's
a single point of
goes
failure
wrong,
as well, right?
It absolutely is. But unless it goes wrong, nobody really looks at it.
Nope.
So I think AI could really help make those parts of a business efficient. But I agree. I think people are playing it a little bit safe at the minute.
I think people are a bit scared of it as well.
Yeah.
People are like, what's it going to do to our jobs? Is it going to change the way things are done? Can someone just come in with an AI and cheat and basically do something that I've been doing manually now for years? The view that I've always sort of taken on it is it's an augmenter rather than so much a replacer, right? If it can help you do the parts of your job that are very boring, very monotonous, very error prone, for example, if AI can step in and help in those areas, that's where I think it's going to find the most amount of value. I don't think it's ever really going to be a massive grand replacer. Don't get me wrong, in some ways it will replace some jobs in a company. But I think for those that are there and using it and able to use it, it's going to let you achieve more in less time without as many errors. So you can focus on the parts that a human can do best, which realistically is relationship building.
Yeah.
An AI is never going to be able to have that one-to-one relationship with a client, for example. It can call up and go, how things going, have that conversation and get dinner with them, for example. AI is not going to do that.
No, of course not. No.
And so really what it means is the areas that only humans can do should be something we can put more time into, which for me at least is really exciting. I'd much rather sit here and the scary thing is there's AI that can generate a podcast for you, which is ridiculous. But being able to sit down and have people talk and share their experiences is something that you'll never find a machine able to do, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'll bridge the gap between your non-experienced and your experienced staff.
Definitely.
Those people who just know intuitively from experience what to do.
The way I describe it is it raises the floor.
Yeah.
Everyone gets a higher entry bar, which is nice.
Yeah. But I think what you mentioned there just before, which is interesting, is around, I think in the industry, a lot of people are still talking about automation. I think they need to get automation almost fixed. They need to understand and get the importance of clean, accurate data. And most people get it, they just don't know how to maintain it.
Totally.
When discussions that we have with people moving CRM, the data migration piece is a huge concern for them, and rightly so. But there's a lot of concern that once you've actually got the data into the CRM, how do we make sure that that is maintained, it's accurate, but then people aren't putting junk in the top?
Totally.
Because it's all well and good moving your CRM, but you're not going to be doing it every 6 months to do a data cleanse.
No.
So I think we saw that after the end of after COVID, you had the honeymoon period, everyone was making a whole load of cash, and then things slowed down. They then thought, okay, right, well, it was a candidate market, it's now a client market. We haven't been speaking to our clients properly for over a year. How do we then look to deal with that client market? How do we bring them back into the fold? Data, automation, marketing coming into conversation an awful lot more than they ever have. Even some of them leading the conversation around replacing CRM is sometimes falling on marketing to lead that, because they need data to underpin it.
And that's what we're starting to think about a lot with our reporting. Is a great example of one kind of report that we were mocking up the other day is being able to list all candidates you haven't spoken to in the last 90 days, for example, haven't placed in the last 365 days, and give you a call list as a recruiter that you can then go out there and spend time speaking to, essentially. And the dream state, I think, long term is once a week being able to automate that out to someone and just say, hey, here's a list of people you should be speaking to this week that you need to maintain a relationship with. And dream state, maybe even longer term beyond that, is having AI do that reach out for you.
Yeah.
There was a really cool, I forget what the platform was, but there was a video I watched on Twitter yesterday of, what company was it? I forget who it was, but a developer basically sat down and worked at this company and built out like a call-based AI that will ring someone and say, hey, you're due to be onboarded tomorrow. We haven't got your onboarding documents. Can we set up a call to arrange that? And he was sat there like saying things like, sorry, what's this about? And like, like what documents are you referring to? Asking questions like, can I get paid in this currency instead of that one? And the AI could deal with all of those questions and respond to them very well. It couldn't always give an answer. In terms of the currency one, for example, it said, I'm not really at liberty to give you an answer to that, but we'll talk about it with your onboarding specialist on the call tomorrow. It was very vexing to hear like a lifelike AI having a conversation about, hey, let's get you a call arranged in-house tomorrow at 12. Like, it was having a very real conversation. Even if up front it was saying, just so you're aware, I am an automated AI, but I can have a conversation.
It might be the same tool that I've seen as well, where the example I saw was the AI tool was calling out to candidates to say, I am an AI tool, but we've got this job in this location with this salary. If you're interested and want to know more, please respond, press this button, and I'll put you through to a live. Yeah. I mean, it was, when I first heard it, I thought, this is a bit unusual, but then not everybody wants.
It's a bit, not a bit uncanny valley, isn't it?
It is
it's weird.
But not everybody wants to be speaking to an actual person because they think they're going to get sold to.
Yes.
If it's AI and it sounds like AI, you might actually drop your guard and think, okay, instead of reading it on LinkedIn as an in-mail, I'm now just hearing it on my phone.
Imagine if you could turn around to that AI and rather than pressing buttons, have an actual conversation and say things like, oh, that sounds all right. Can you send me the job spec on LinkedIn so I can have a read of it?
Well, that tool can. This tool can.
Or anything like that. Doing all those things, I think, is just really valuable because, as you say, I think there's naturally barriers that go up when speaking to people that you're going to get sold to of some kind, or they want something from you as a reason for why they're calling. Whereas an AI is much more there to help you, essentially, right? Without any kind of reason for having that conversation.
And imagine if that AI tool, and I think it can actually have the same call to hundreds of people at the same time. Rather than relying on a consultant to do it.
Totally. Yeah, we had a demo really interesting last week of a tool that was like an AI SDR. So an SDR in recruitment in the software world is a sales development rep. They're going out there to book meetings, right? And it was basically saying, this thing works 24/7. It's getting in touch with 100 people a day. It's going through LinkedIn, text, email. In a few months' time, it'll be able to phone call them. It is an SDR, like fully automated for you, looking to do what you want. And I was looking at it like, well, you can't be like that good at writing emails or at writing call scripts, for example, to use when speaking to these people. But it actually turns out it's better than most sales emails I think I've ever seen.
Is it?
And I was just like, well, damn, how much does that cost? And I got 10 grand a month. And I was like, well, that's why I'm not paying for it then. But you can totally see how bigger companies that want to experiment with being able to have this sort of stuff automated or do it at a higher quality without the kind of the human error that comes with that stuff or the poor emails that come as a result. It was just really fascinating to see it. So tech's getting scary, and AI is definitely going to be leading that charge. I think.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have been in the receiving end of AI, but now that you can actually use it in your work life yourself, ChatGPT, tidy this email up. I think some people get it wrong. You can tell, LinkedIn posts, you can
images,
tell
videos. I saw a really cool platform the day I sent to my dad because he used to be a music producer. That was like entering a prompt and it will make you a song based on that prompt. And some of these songs are wicked, like really good. And I was just like, mate, this is terrifying. It's not like someone sat in a garage and recorded it with a terrible microphone echoing all around a garage, for example. It's proper like high quality produced stuff.
Yeah.
And so that just makes for a really interesting future, I think, where, in the world that I work in outside of business, the whole esports commentary world, there's a lot of creative individuals who love making art, love making music, and naturally they're really quite incensed by AI because they're like, essentially it's stealing the work of others and using that to then produce its own, which anyone can do like that. So suddenly you've got scores of creatives potentially out of work as a result of that, which is quite a scary thought. And that's one thing I'm not yet fully sure which way I lean on the creative aspect of it. Again, I like the idea of it being an augmenter. Being a full-on replacer for certain people makes it a little bit, not sure.
But I think in certain fields it will replace.
Oh, definitely
In
will.
others it'll augment.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I think in graphics it probably is going to fully replace at some point, which then again sets up a very scary future for artists. Is the really, really worrying thing.
Okay. So it's a
weird future we're going into, but I think one that
Are you? I guess you have to embrace it with the world that you're in. But are you embracing it with optimism or pessimism?
I think a lot of optimism. I think what needs to make sure, and we're going into politics here to a degree, but I think that it means things like government policy need to keep up with what AI is doing. If it's about to suddenly eliminate, a third of the industries around the world, like a lot of creatives, because suddenly AI can do it all, you've got a massive unemployment epidemic on your hands there. And you can turn around and say, I'll just retrain and do another job. That's cool. But that's still 30% of jobs that have been lost. So there's got to be some, I think, drastic change in terms of policy and the way that we approach employment in general if we're going to make this sort of thing work in future. Because that dream state of an AI being able to do, think about movies you watch where it's AI manning like dumpster trucks going around emptying bins, for example, and doing creative things for you and being able to just say, hey, I want this done. Can you ring up and book me a haircut today? You go there and it's a robot that's cutting your hair, for example. Loads of things will, industries will disappear, I think, as a result of that. So the society has got to keep up with it. And that's the thing I'm most pessimistic about.
Right.
Everything else, very excited for, because it will really, I think 20 years from now, the world is just not going to be recognizable. Like I remember seeing, was it Google? They'd used AI to teach robots how to play soccer or football, and then have adapted over time. And they learn by playing more and more. Okay, if I tap down that wing and do this kind of move when that player is there, this is going to happen. You'll have like AI Ronaldo soon. You watch and he'll be scoring like 30 goals a season or something ridiculous. Robo football will be class though.
Yeah.
Could you imagine the sports of the future? It'd be brilliant. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting future we're coming into, I think. Yeah, it's one that I'm very optimistic about. Just a bit nervous about the impacts on society as a result if we don't keep up with those changes quickly enough.
I can just, from personal experiences, it'll make you better at your job and save you a lot of time. I naturally get some questions, usually technical, where I don't always know the answer. Now, rather than me trolling through manuals or trolling through the internet to get it, I can literally type it in, go to Copilot. It'll give me literally a yes or no answer. Yep. It'll then summarize the answer. Then, and I'm not explaining anything new here, but then I'll show all the different sources of where that information was from. That's saved me usually 45 minutes to an hour, like that.
It's crazy.
It just makes you quicker and better at your job.
It raises that floor, right? So everyone is at that similar level.
It does.
Makes us way more productive as a workforce, which can only mean good things.
Yeah. And do you think it's the companies who are literally jumping on board and wanting to be at the beginning or even the front of all of that AI who are going to be the most successful? Do you think it's the ones who are sitting back and thinking, okay, let's just see how the market plays out. Let's see what other people are doing, suppliers, customers, let them make the mistakes.
Yeah. I think you get this. I forget what the name of it is. It's like the hype cycle graph, right? Where things start up here, like everyone's spending loads of money. There's loads of companies popping up trying it. You get to the sort of top. And then it comes down to what's called the trough of disillusionment, where it's like, we thought it'd be this amazing thing and now it's suddenly crashed out. And then where industries then tend to see themselves doing really well is on the curve off the back of that, when things then start to stabilize a little bit more in that long futures where things start to look really good. I think we're still very much with AI kind of on this massive hype cycle at the moment.
Yeah.
There probably will come a point where either it disappoints people in some way, shape or form. It does come down, even if only temporarily. That longer tail will be where things start to get really exciting, because right now you've got Microsoft, Google, Meta, Apple pouring billions into AI, right? It really is kind of who's the first past the post here? Who's really going to crack it? So it becomes like, whoa. And I think it was OpenAI, which is Microsoft, said something like, we've got AI right now. There's general AI that's coming next, which will be even more ludicrously powerful than what we've had before. And so I think there will be a market leader who kind of really cracks it and just wins in a sense. But then there'll be a lot of those that observe and wait for these things to come and then build their own solutions, making use of these things as like a medium. So there'll be winners and losers both at the start and towards the end / long term, whatever you want to call it, right? It's going to be really interesting. Really interesting.
And like you're, I guess, concerned, there's a question mark, particularly in the gaming side. Are you concerned at all about what you're doing with OneUP with AI? Are you seeing it as a real opportunity?
I think it's more of an opportunity. Like if we can use AI to let you ask a question of your data, this is another conversation in itself. You think about the way that we interact.
To ask the data, I know.
Yeah. But just think about how we interact with computers today when we're trying to get a report built or something. You've got to fill in like 20 different fields, select from drop downs, type in a search thing. And even then it doesn't give you what you want. It's just like, oh my God, like, come on, man. Whereas, we invented the form because we couldn't speak to a computer like a human. We now can. And so what you can do is ask an AI in human language, ideally over voice would be the dream, Can you show me a report of all the clients we worked with last year and how many placements we did, the revenue we've got, matched against how many meetings we had with them and calls we made to them? Show it me as a bar chart. If you can say that and you get given that insight there inside 5 seconds, instead of having to go on a 20-hour course, learn how to use something like Power BI, for example, that's like brilliant. That's going to be game-changing when it comes to being data literate inside of a company, I think. And so I'm really excited to see what that future looks like. Like we're at stage 1 now, being able to build out the ability to show reports of that kind. The next step may well be not just visualization, but also being able to use AI to query that data. Okay. So that's where I'm thinking the future might look like for us, for sure.
Nice.
It'd be very interesting.
It is actually quite an interesting conversation to have.
It's one that I'm always wary of because people hear about AI all the time. People are just like,
I know.
Can we stop talking about it?
I know.
But I think it's such a fascinating area.
I usually have to preface it with, I know it's been talked about a lot. I don't want to bore people with it. But then when you get into it, everyone wants to talk about it.
Yeah, because again, it is that really interesting future, the great unknown in a sense. Like people speak about like the Industrial Revolution and things like that. This will be, the internet then revolutionized things again. AI will be the next one that's coming along, I think. Forget about the little micro ones along the way. AI is the next big one, I think. Yeah. It's just going to come with a lot of challenges, like I say, socially along the way, I think. We'll see. We'll see.
We'll have to watch this space.
We'll all be old men sat in retirement homes being served by robots anyway, so it's going to be great. Can't wait.
They don't know what you're after.
Oh, they'll figure it out. They'll know by being able to read your pulse and all sorts from a distance, and you'll be like, this is well weird, man. All those dystopian films you watch, like...
It's coming.
It's coming. iRobot's on the way.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good place to wrap up, Derry. Thank you for joining us today.
No worries.
If people want to know more about OneUP and what you've got to offer, where do they get in contact?
I think the easiest place will always be the website, although it's a bit impersonal, I guess. OneUpSales.co.uk, or best place to grab me is really on LinkedIn, just Derry Holt on there, DerryHolt. I'm probably the only Derry Holt on LinkedIn, I think, which is a great thing to be able to say. Grab me on there. I'm always happy to talk about things. I post quite a lot about the journey that we're on, the things that we're learning, what we're seeing in the industry as well. So hopefully some insight to get from that as well.
Great. Thanks, Derry.
No worries.